Memory transcription subject, Slanik, Venmal Space Corps. Date, Standardized Human Time, October 8, 2136. The humans instructed me to place a wraparound headset over my ears. I was impressed with how they had modified their technology with Venmal in mind, though I hoped I wasn't the only one who would get to use it. The earpiece fed simulated audio of alarms and hits. It also allowed Sarah to speak to me directly. Slanik, I'm going to talk to you throughout this exercise. In time, I hope you will learn to do these things yourself, she explained, in a melodic voice. Thoughts guide our actions. By changing your thoughts, you can unlearn negative behaviors. I tilted my head. But that's the problem. You can't control your thoughts. Well, not with that attitude. You didn't develop your thinking patterns overnight, Sarah responded. It takes time, effort, and understanding to make a self-adjustment. Mind if I ask you a few questions before we begin the simulation? Go for it. When was the first time you encountered a predator? I failed to see the relevance of the question, but I decided to humor the human. If she thought delving into the origins of predator phobia would further her understanding, it wouldn't hurt to play along. The more background info she had on me, the better subject I would be. You saw the Arxer on TV, but that doesn't really count. Mother tried to shield us from those atrocities, I recalled. Encounters with predators were uncommon on Venmal Prime, though occasionally, one slipped through the cracks. Teams of investigators in armored vehicles would travel out to the site, scorching any area with evidence of a hunter's presence. There was no way we would leave them alive to reproduce and terrorize our settlements. Extermination officer was an occupation that paid well, but all the money in the world wouldn't be enticing enough for me. My parents took me for a walk in the local pasture, and there was a dead rodent on the sidewalk. Lots of blood. There were larvae all over it, news cameras turned up within minutes. A shudder rippled down my spine at the memory. The anchors said a predator might be on the loose. The entire neighborhood was placed on a curfew by local police. Schools were closed indefinitely. Tyler couldn't hear the other end of the conversation, but he shot me a baffled look. The human's eyebrow arched up his forehead, as though he couldn't believe what he was hearing. I think the words he mouthed were, "What the fuck?" Tell me more about that. Did they find out what happened to the dead animal? Sarah inquired. I gritted my teeth. It died of natural causes, according to the autopsy. Everyone was relieved that there was no imminent threat. But that was the week I learned about food chains, and our place on it. How did that make you feel? Scared. Powerless. I just couldn't believe there were animals that based their existence on killing. I can tell this is difficult for you, Slanik. If I may, what conclusions did your childhood self reach about predators? Predators had to be cruel and unfeeling, to be able to stomach such violence. To eat that rotting corpse I saw. The Arxer must have cemented those beliefs. I take it that was your initial feeling toward humans? A horrified gasp came from my chest, as I realized what I just said about predators. It had slipped my mind that I was talking to one, while I was focusing on the emotional residue of that experience. There was the thoughtlessness Marcel teased me over. I'm sorry, that was too honest. I didn't mean to say I squeaked. Relax. I'm not offended. Sarah's voice was reserved and soothing, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. I want you to be transparent with me, especially about how humans make you feel. I don't like to think about humans being predators. It's jarring to equate you with, the animal in the field. With eating rotting corpses. Yes. The scientist was silent on the other end of the headset, and I caught some light scraping sounds. She must be taking notes from what I was telling her. I hoped I hadn't said too much. The humans wouldn't admit they were offended, even if they were. You did great, Slanik. Thank you for sharing that with me. What I am going to ask of you now is to try to put yourself in the predator's shoes, she said. Come up with as many reasons why an animal might choose to hunt as you can, beyond being cruel, violent, and unfeeling. We'll talk about it at tomorrow's session. I focused my eyes on the floor, ignoring Tyler's inquisitive stare. Did flesh taste so good that it was addictive? It was tough to think of a single other allure to predation, other than biological impulse. Even with humans, I assumed they had those aspects within them due to their brutal hunting methods. The difference was that I believed they had another side, and that there were enough positive attributes to outweigh the repugnant ones. Besides, they found a way to sate their cravings without harming other creatures. Maybe that's something I should ask Marcel. He might know the answers Sarah is looking for. I breathed a weary sigh. I don't know if I can do that, but I'll try. Good. Now, we're going to start your mission. The goal of this exercise is to stop any hostile ships from reaching orbital range of Earth. I'll be here for guidance as needed. The screens glowed to life, and Tyler clenched his fist around the firing trigger. The image of Earth in the background was hyper-realistic, down to the orange glow dotting the continents. Swirling clouds idled across the oceans, and the inky backdrop framed the planet in serene radiance. It was a breathtaking sight, even in a simulation. I searched for enemy contacts on sensor data. Craning my neck, I tried to get a visual on a fast-approaching vessel from our left. The blinders were inhibiting my sight line, so it was difficult to ground myself. At least it rendered me impervious to the virtual explosions and conflict taking place in the distance. My breath hitched in my throat as a plasma beam sailed meters from our hull. This felt too real and dangerous. The stress of decision-making was enough to make panic seep in. I was frozen as usual. What was I supposed to do? I couldn't even remember how to engage the targeting systems. Nonetheless, inaction was unacceptable. My trembling paw slammed the steering column and veered the ship toward the hostile. My diminished vision blurred, my heart was pounding so hard that it felt like an earthquake in my chest. Every instinct declared that facing an aggressive foe was too perilous. I feel like I'm going to die. Like I'm flying into my doom, and it's not even real. Meanwhile, Tyler was impossibly collected, as he aligned kinetic munitions with the target. How could humans push through the chemical fog with such ease? It was as though their instincts compelled them to run headlong toward danger, rather than gallop to safety. Slanek, deep breaths. Count to 5 as you inhale, then count to 5 as you exhale, Sarah's voice growled. I took a few wheezing breaths, attempting to comply with her orders. Through the lightheadedness, I could see the opposing craft enlarging in the viewport. A horrified gasp escaped before I could contain it. This was all happening so quickly. There was no time to think. Everything on screen froze, including the hostile that was just magnified. I slumped my shoulders in shame. The humans were going to ken the experiment on day 1. I was a hopeless cause. Helping them was never going to be within my capability, no matter how much I wanted it to be. Talk to me. The scientist's voice sounded urgent over the headset, which jolted me out of my daze. Rate your fear on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the worst you've ever felt. I blinked in confusion. 7? We can work with that. Everything is going to be fine. This feeling will pass, Sarah said. What thoughts went through your mind as you started to feel afraid? I know I can't do this. I'm not a fighter, and I never will be. My instincts can't handle stress or danger. What I'm hearing is that you don't feel that you can control your emotions. You've decided it's not possible already. Humans are special. I have to face what I am. What you are is a good pilot. Remember, the enemy is just as vulnerable as you. It doesn't feel that way. Never does. Focus on your target and get the shot off. Everything else doesn't matter, you can complete that one thing. One step at a time. Squeezing my eyes shut, I allowed my breathing to fall back into a calm rhythm. It was within my power to press a few buttons, wasn't it? There had to be a way to override my instincts, the way the humans kept their aggression in check. Marcel had squared off against 9 Arxer vessels in an inferior ship, and we survived. This was nothing. Hey, we can do this, Slanek. You're not alone here. Remember that. Tyler growled. I flicked my ears in appreciation. The sandy-haired human didn't have much heart after learning Earth's insurmountable odds, but he was still trying to be supportive. Bravery felt a little less difficult, knowing that fearless predators had my back. Humans were survivors, and that meant I was in good company. You're not doing this by yourself. You're on the predator's side, not the crocodile. They're the ones who should be afraid. I believed in humanity's strength, even if I was uncertain of my own. Newfound determination swelled in my veins as the simulation resumed. The blinders were there for the purpose of directing my attention to a single task. It was a matter of just acting, and not thinking at all. The opposing ship barreled toward us, racing closer to Earth. My aviation knowledge kicked in, and I verified the target on sensors. All I contemplated was the intake of my breathing, while my claw jammed down on the missile switch. Projectiles homed in on the sleek bomber, tracking its evasion attempts. My human partner sent a flurry of kinetics close behind. It was prudent to take advantage of any disruption to shields. The missiles rocked the imaginary opponent, and Tyler's well-timed rounds tore through its armor. The seamless teamwork was invigorating, for a moment. The predator bared his teeth at the thrill, and I almost mimicked him. Instead of allowing the follow-up options to overwhelm me, I asked myself what humans would do. They would go for the kill, and not give the enemy any recovery time. Persistence hunting taught them how to be relentless. Maybe I could learn from that cruelty as well. Leave my friends alone. I hissed to the screen. It was easy to channel my outrage at the unprovoked assault on Earth. Nobody hurts my herd, ever again. I navigated the ship nearer to our nemesis. My anger at injustice was warring with the voice that told me to turn back. The resolute snarl on Tyler's face was enough to keep my paw on the accelerator. Just this once, I wanted to be the predator, to pounce on a weakened enemy. My heart was racing, while I unloaded a devastating salvo into their flanks. Orange tendrils burst from its metallic shell, and damned the fictitious crew to the vacuum. The simulation faded back to white, with a mission success declaration. You did it! Tyler cheered, forcing a grin. That was all you, Slanek. I leapt up from the pilot's seat, wagging my tail. As the Federation often reminded us, Venlol weren't supposed to have a fighting bone in our bodies. How had I managed to kill an enemy, and emulate Terran intensity? Had the humans changed me? An answer to Sarah's earlier question popped into my mind. An animal might choose to be a predator because it refined their species into something stronger. Hunting mandated discipline and lessened the brunt of fearful instincts. Maybe it was empowering to be the one dealing the damage. Sarah cleared her throat. I told you that you were a good pilot. That exercise should give you hope for what we can accomplish. But it was only one ship, guys, I pointed out. That's nothing compared to the crocodile invasion. We're going to increase the duration and number of enemies every day. You'll be taking on an army in no time. The exhilaration of success fizzled out as I processed that daunting prospect. The scientist sounded hellbent on pushing me well past my instinct's limit when all was said and done. Every day was going to be more of a struggle than the next. If nothing else though, her questioning had forced me to consider my fears in a new light. Oh buddy, I'm so proud of you. Marcel must have snagged the microphone. His rumbling voice fluttered into my ears. You're going to turn those birds to space feathers. They'll never see it coming. Thanks, but I don't know about that. He chuckled. You're stronger than you think you are. The attacking skills are there, as we all saw. You nailed that fucker, even with Tyler button mashing and getting in your way. This time, the tall co-pilot leaned close enough to hear the headset chatter. He threw up his hands in exasperation, then turned his glare at me for giggling. There was hilarity in the expression that once would have had me on the floor, begging not to be eaten. I knew humans well enough to recognize the difference between jest and malice. Tyler waved a fist at the camera. Slanik and I are gonna win this war, while you're still on your ass eating Doritos. Nah, are you kidding, bro? I'll be up there, stopping you from snacking on too many crayons mid-battle. What can I say? That's a true predator's diet. I appreciated that my friends were able to make light of a dark situation. That was their method of coping with the unpleasant. There wasn't a more resilient species in the galaxy. With their example to model, maybe it was possible to mold me into something a little more vicious. The survival of these alien predators was what was important, I reminded myself. My progression was a secondary objective that would complement Terran aims. If Earth was to be lost, the spiteful defenders would take as many enemies with them as possible. No battle waged against humans was ever as easy as it looked on paper. Regardless, I had faith the Venmal Republic wouldn't hang our allies out to dry. Memory transcription subject, Captain Cal Sim, Crocodile Alliance Command. Date, Standardized Human Time, October 8, 2136. The Federation fleet entered warp in harmonious accord, and our voyage to Earth commenced on schedule. I was less than thrilled with the extraneous additions to my crew. Crocodile officers were preferred to the reserved exports of another species. Our diplomats stressed that this was an interplanetary effort, and forced my talons. While I understood the necessity of building group cohesion, the farcel they implanted as operational first officer was already asking questions. His name was Thion. To my understanding, he was a personal favorite of their High Elder. That didn't buy him any favor on my vessel. The Crocodile Alliance was the entity that planned this mission, down to the gritty details. My crew was chosen because of their special attributes, and I trust them. You never know who can keep their head in battle until you've been there. Thion scrunched his droopy ears. Why are Terran colonies not on the bombing agenda? The data dump suggested humans had settlements on the Red World and their moon. There's research outposts in the gas giant moons, asteroid mining operations, orbital telescopes and... I get it. But Earth is the priority, I replied. Other than military installations, the rest can be cleaned up afterwards. The farcel wiped the mucus from his nose. The plans for a follow-up operation should be drawn up now. We have to stay prepared. What is there to prepare for? The predators can't muster a semblance of our numbers. I puffed my feathers out in a display of intimidation. You know, Thion, I much prefer Jayla as my XO. She doesn't nitpick everything. You keep strange company, Calsim. There's something wrong with Jayla. She seems off. There was a comment that had some basis to it, though I wasn't ready to take an outsider into my confidence. Jayla was diagnosed with a rare cognitive disorder that entailed not producing the neurotransmitters for fear or affection. This caused a deficiency in empathy. Her responses to situations were often tasteless. Most Alliance officers wouldn't have allowed such individuals in their crew. However, the benefit of a person that didn't panic or lose focus couldn't be understated. As long as she didn't have to deal with the interpersonal side of things, Jayla was the finest officer in my crew. I credited her as the reason we were the most effective ship in the Alliance Armada. That is Captain Calsim to you, I spat. Jayla follows orders and makes the right calls. She's still my second even now, as far as I'm concerned. Captain, I see we've gotten off on the wrong paw. Thion's slender tail curled across the floor, twitching with restlessness. I'd rather be on a farsal vessel too, but this is where we are. Can we try to make the most of it? I tossed my beak. Fine. But did you have to start tearing everything apart the second you came aboard? I like to know who and what I'm working with. Every captain has a different background and a different way of running things. The more I know about you, the more useful I can be. Then I'll keep it short and sweet. I started off as an extermination officer. I'm still one really, just with a starship and a title. Thion's whiskers twitched as my former profession registered in his mind. There wasn't a better vocation to prepare a person for eliminating predators. It taught how to destroy a monster's habitat and prevent any chances of survival. Sapient extermination wasn't that different, except that there was more land to torch with the breadth of a planet. There was a buzzing sound at the door, and I peeked at the security feed. The other Federation implant on my crew was the new medical officer, though the peculiar aspect was the species. The doctor was a TAC-CAN veteran. The TAC-CAN coalition had been outed as one of the parties amenable to a full alliance with humanity. For some reason, this TAC-CAN individual had thrown himself onto a transport and begged to join our raid. The newly demoted Jayla escorted him to my quarters, per my request. It was a mystery why a medical practitioner would want to fly toward a predator's homeworld. My own doctor deserted when she learned the fleet's destination. It could be a simple case of this TAC-CAN despising his government's rhetoric. Still, I want to look him in the eye and demand his reasons. Come in, I growled to the intercom. Thion, you can stay if you want. The farsal thumped his tail. Yes, sir. I can't believe he's stolen my post, Jayla snapped. We'll settle this later, soft ears. I glowered at the female crocodile. Don't mind her. Please, come in, doctor. The TAC-CAN male strode through the door and plopped himself in a chair without waiting for permission. His tough hide was silver, about the same hue as my ship's metallic walls. Those tritoed paws wiggled enough to grasp objects, though I found his kind much clumsier than crocodile surgeons. Few species compared to how well our talons could sink into or wrap around things. I jabbed a talon at the doctor. What is your name, Zarn, sir? All right. Tell me, what is a TAC-CAN doing, volunteering for a mission like this? I squawked. When I landed on Alpha to share that the Gojid cradle was annihilated, I discovered that my species betrayed the Federation in my absence. It was horrifying, shameful. Captain, I want to put an end to this alliance, permanently. I nodded my beak and contemplated his words. If we return from deployment to find the alliance cozying up to predators, it might push me to renounce my citizenship as well. Then again, a doctor shouldn't have devoted his entire life to extermination. Why would Zarn feel compelled to take such drastic measures? Wait, if I may, you were stationed in Gojid space? Thion interjected. Zarn swished his tail. Yes. I was working under Captain Sovlin. We were the first vessel to encounter a human. My eyes snapped toward him. I heard. Everyone heard. What you lot did was cruel and disgraceful. I don't know that I want you on this ship. I beg your pardon, Captain. It was a human, not an actual sapient. That abominable freak deserved to rot for eternity. All predators do. The captive Terran pilot in their custody could no longer pose any threat, yet Sovlin and his lackeys granted it the slowest death possible. Extermination teams were swift and surgical. When our services were needed, suffering was never our goal. Listening to a helpless creature scream and knowing it was an unimaginable pain, that didn't make anyone safer. The line that separated us from the Arxer was one that could not be crossed. Humans are true sapients, Doctor, make no mistake. My feathers were ruffled as I offered the reproachful assessment. I even believe they feel selective empathy. They're pack predators, after all. I'm surprised to hear you say that, Thyon muttered. Why? Because I used to be an extermination officer? Zarn blinked in surprise. The doctor gave the appearance that he was about to contest my statements, but my field expertise was enough to make him reconsider. I understood predators better than most citizens of the Federation. Humans weren't as simple as they would like to believe. Captain Calsim has a certain respect for humans. He thinks they're interesting, as do I, Jayla chuckled. The physician's amber eyes bulged. Interesting? Respect? They kill for sustenance. I puffed out my feathers for emphasis. If you don't respect a predator, you're already dead. They're not to be trifled with. Remarkably cunning. The Farsal officer tilted his head. Your tone is almost reverent. Wouldn't someone with your skill set hate predators? Thyon, you shouldn't hate humans. They can't help that they're a disease, that they infect everything they touch. Bacteria don't choose to be bacteria, and predators don't choose to be predators. They just are. So what are you saying? It sounds like you don't believe in this mission, Zarn snarled. Sure I do, but it shouldn't be about hatred. I don't derive any pleasure from killing billions, only a predator should. You should feel sorry for the humans, and be grateful that we were not born in such an accursed form. The doctor recoiled, and I could see indignation brewing in his eyes. The company this Captain Sovlin kept seemed like an extension of his own undisciplined behavior. It must have been difficult for Zarn to witness the cradle's destruction, but his current behavior was unhinged. I wouldn't want this tack-can cutting me open, if my life was in the balance. You pity a creature that is incapable of pity. It's ironic, Jayla remarked, a sharp glint in her eyes. Thyon's nostrils flared. Hey, I'm not following either, Captain. Why do you support wiping humanity out, if you feel sorry for predators? Few understood how terrible it was to pour gasoline on a youngling as it cried for its mother's milk. The first time I found a nest of predator pups, the guilt of killing them nearly caused me to quit. They were tiny, innocent, and untainted by their parents' atrocities. I broke down on the ride home and asked my mentor how we could kill a baby for the way it was born. There was cold logic in her explanation. Little predators become big predators and reproduce exponentially. Within a few cycles, there would be a full-blown infestation. It wouldn't be one set of pups we were killing. What happens if we don't wipe them out? Humans will spread everywhere, and they'll be in our systems in no time, I answered. This is our only chance to destroy them. We kill because we must. It was an unfortunate reality that Earth had to be eradicated. Unlike our incensed ambassador Jerolim, I understood why most in the Federation couldn't bring themselves to push the button. They were relieved not to have to wrestle with the moral conundrum of killing a species that had yet to lash out. They didn't want to spend the rest of their lives wondering if some predators could have been saved. It was the same reason the Federation readily accepted that humanity destroyed itself with nuclear bombs 200 years ago. That was how this problem got so out of wing in the first place. The predators attained spacefaring capabilities without anyone realizing. Only a few months into their expeditions, humans had already caused the destruction of the Gojid cradle. The longer we let Earth survive, the more Federation worlds will perish. We agree on this being our moral imperative, but that's all we agree on. Zarn leapt up from his seat and swished his tail with impatience. I'm here because I want to witness humanity's death with my own eyes. I'm qualified, overqualified, even, and I know the enemy. Now, do you want my services or not? Jayla snickered at the Takan's temperament. I like this one, Captain. Well, I do not, but it's not like I have a suitable replacement, I muttered. You'll follow my orders on this ship, Zarn. It's not becoming of a doctor to have such little value for life. I don't need a lecture over how I feel toward predators. I value lives, our lives. Jayla, show me to the med bay, now, Zarn hissed. The female crocodile glanced at me for confirmation, and I curled my wingtip in a go-on gesture. Something told me I needed to keep a close eye on the doctor. The kind of person that delighted in death and suffering would never have intentions that I could trust. Besides, it was a bad omen when the crewmate who took a shine to Zarn was a sociopath. That was an unpleasant discussion. What do you think, Thion? I asked. The Farsal hesitated. I think I have your back, sir. That's not what I'm asking. If you're going to be my XO, then I expect you to speak freely behind closed doors. Frankly, I've seen what happens after predators hit a world as well. There's nothing to feel remorse over. I'll sleep better when this mission is done. Understood. Let's head to the bridge, and keep watch for any Terran ambushes. My heart felt heavy as we set off together, and I wondered where my crew fell along the moral spectrum. Thion missed the distinction between his feelings and Zarn's, though perhaps he would realize in time. Unlike the doctor, the first officer was motivated by reasons that had nothing to do with the humans. His concern was the suffering he witnessed and any future threats, rather than pure vitriol. That was the correct rationale for the destruction of Earth. This fleet would succeed in its duties, because there was no other option for our survival. Memory transcription subject, Captain Calsim, Crocodile Alliance Command. Date, Standardized Human Time, October 9, 2136. As soon as we departed Crocodile space, it became evident that the humans had been tracking our movements. The predators were lurking in the shadows along our starry route. 2 ambushes were sprung on the fleet during the first day of travel. The primates knew that we were coming, and that was enough to unsettle the crew. But the humans were afraid, from what I could tell. Their attacks seemed devoted to stalling and chipping away at our resources. Larger Terran ships had FTL disruptors on their hulls, which could be deployed as soon as we came within range. They would dart in for a missile run while we were dazed, then vanish just as quickly. Why do they flee after a single strike? These techniques seem too cowardly to be born of predators. Nonetheless, I adjusted personnel rotations so that our vessel was combat-ready at all times. I allowed myself only a short nap after the second ambush, just to refresh my wits. There was no time for a full night's rest until the enemy resurfaced. Thion was working overtime as well, compiling data to predict the Terran's next appearance. Our vessel was going to nail the humans next time they tried anything. If their attempts at disrupting our operations were this lousy, they must lack confidence in their combat abilities. This locale seems like the likeliest spot for an ambush. The EM radiation from the system's pulsar makes our sensors and targeting wonky, the first officer said. Though, perhaps I'm mistaken. It would affect their targeting too. My feathers ruffled with disquiet. I suspect humans' reliance on targeting is less than ours. They have a backup system in their brains. Should we advise the fleet to reroute? If I'm correct on Terran whereabouts, there's less than a minute before they activate the disruptors. Let's not do anything hasty, Thion. Their ships can outpace us, so we'll just be pushing this off to a later date. We face these predator pests here, on our terms. The Farsal officer swallowed nervously and studied his readout. I couldn't blame the big-eared guy for feeling discomfort about engaging the humans blind. Our instinctual fear wasn't conducive to off-the-cuff maneuvers and precise calculations under stress. Crocodile could muster aggression, sure, but that desperation wasn't controlled. But Jayla wasn't bogged down by chemicals. If I placed her behind the weapons station, she could recalibrate our artillery on a dime. We didn't have to worry about fear-addling her senses. There was a reason I twisted the brass wing, not to lock her up in an asylum like they wanted to. It was in our best interest to use people like her against the predators. I cleared my throat. Jayla, assume control of weapons. Switch to manual override, and hit the first ship you see with whatever you like. The female crocodile shoved a younger officer out of her way, and pecked the buttons with giddiness. She didn't need to be told twice. It was rare to see anyone else so thrilled to carry out orders, especially when those involved being flung into combat. My second-in-command wouldn't miss the clues if they were shoved in his face. "Captain, answer me honestly," Thyonn whispered. "Does Jayla have predator disease?" I lowered my voice. "That terminology is ignorant. Predators do feel fear. Jayla is an asset that I have under control. She knows I'm the only thing stopping her from being thrown in a deep, dark hole. I don't believe for a second that predators feel anything, but she has more in common with them either way. How can you trust her not to side with them? Even people with her condition don't side with people who want to eat them. I've heard that has a way of shortening your lifespan." "You don't say." The Farsal transferred the projected enemy coordinates onto the sensor grid. By his estimates, the humans were camped within a gas giant's ring. It seemed a suitable position to lie in wait. The planet's gravitational field added further disturbance to sensor readings, and the icy ring particles were indistinguishable from a quiet vessel. That's actually some solid analytics from Thyonn. I suppose I'm fortunate the guy the Federation saddled me with is halfway intelligent. The first officer also noted the maximum range of an FTL disruptor. It stood to reason that the humans would wait until the bulk of the fleet was within the pulse's umbrella. I highlighted the blast zone circumference on my screen, using their approximate location. Now, it was a matter of forging ahead and waiting. "Navigations, as soon as we hit the edge of that red circle, disengage warp," I squawked. "If we time this right, the humans will think we're stunned. Just as they show themselves, we'll be ready to fire." Thyonn blinked in surprise. "Bold plan. If we're off by a few seconds, we'll get dazed alongside everyone else. And if we drop in too early, the humans will know we're onto them. Of course, we don't know they're here for sure. We could be chasing ghosts, but I'm trusting your work." "Thank you, sir. Shouldn't we tip off the fleet though?" "Negative. The predators may have breached our comms. Other friendly vessels may have come to similar conclusions, but our role as the Crocodile flagship was to seize the initiative. Defeating a predator necessitated brashness. I don't think even the meticulous humans accounted for us turning the tables. They were under the impression that everyone in the Federation was weak, and that might serve us well." The fear plastered across the bridge crew's faces was apparent. The inexperienced enlistees weren't keen on hurling a multi-billion credit ship into a predator's trap. To be fair, this was the kind of action that earned reprimands from Alliance Command if it backfired. We had one chance to validate our decisions. My file does say I take unnecessary risks and attributes my success to luck. I imagine Thyonn read that dossier before boarding. For better or for worse, I always asked myself what a predator would do. Trying to predict their moves or understand their thinking was easy, once it was a habit. This raid was one final job, before passing the baton to someone younger. What better way to cap off my career than by vanquishing the greatest threat of our time? I fluttered over to the navigation station, ready to intervene if the technician froze. Our dot was almost overlapping the perilous area. Thyonn was itching to issue the disengage order, but I didn't want to jump the gun. We couldn't allow the riskiness to inhibit our patience. My breathing hitched as we entered the pulse threshold. A little further, real space, now. A head-on view of a gas giant materialized on the viewport. The dull orange mass, surrounded by a glistening ring, was a sight to behold. My talons stiffened, as the feeling of being watched sank in. I couldn't see any enemy ships, but I could sense their unholy presence. "No sign of human activity," Thyonn began. Thousands of friendly vessels appeared around us without warning. The Federation fleet was evidently reeling from the effects of the disruptor signal. Live Terran ships swarmed out of the ring and descended on the nearest crocodile vessels with fury. Jayla's wings extended to their full span as she began firing missiles at will. Several projectiles slammed into an enemy bomber, and it was terminated mid-swoop. More explosives followed close behind, synced with whirring kinetics that pelted their shields. The humans were pushed back by my crazed crocodile, long enough for some friendlies to catch their bearings. Our allies' aim was clearly rattled without sensors, and most plasma beams missed their mark by a long shot. Nonetheless, the Predators determined the mission was a wash. They weren't going to take the chance of a stray hit connecting. There's only a few dozen ships in this ambush, anyways. The Terran military didn't lend sufficient support. They're retreating. Don't let them get away, the Farsal first officer exclaimed. All Federation ships, fire at will. I barked over the comms channel. I don't care if you miss. Hurl everything you've got ready at their position. Jayla was happy to oblige those orders, and dispensed another round of missiles toward the gas giant's cover. That was where the Terrans were trying to vanish for emergency warp. None of our explosives connected with an opponent, but they did pack a punch to the ring itself. Ice fragments were flung out from the epicenter, and some shrapnel found its way into human armor. The navigations officer maneuvered us to the edge of the ring. The proximity was close enough to get a visual. A few Predator craft were rendered inoperable or ripped apart by debris. Cheers erupted across the bridge as they saw the devastation we unleashed. I tried to mimic pleasure, but gunning humans down just made me feel numb. My eyes lingered on the wreckage in the viewport. Nice work, Jayla. We must have taken out a number in the double digits, in no small part, due to your fortitude. Don't mention it. That was fun, she trilled. Just a shame our skirmish was so short. I was expecting more of a scrap. Thion narrowed his eyes. It's not a shame that our victory was decisive. It makes it more likely that our flight to Earth will continue unimpeded. I tuned out their bickering. My focus was on scanning a motionless Terran vessel via manual input. Ship sensors had been fully automated since before I was born. At close range, though, it should be possible to work through the interference with operator assistance. The human craft I scrutinized had its hull caved in, which suggested debris impact at high velocity. It was mostly intact, but life support and propulsions were knocked offline. Some part of me itched to know if its pilot was still alive. Future generations would ask about these Earth, and nobody could provide an adequate explanation. This was a pristine opportunity to document a sapient predator's mannerisms. Silence on the bridge. Comms, make sure all transmissions are being recorded, I screeched. I want everyone here to know the enemy, so I'm hailing that venting wreck. Consider it a crash course on predators. Thion gasped. What? What makes you think that demon will answer? I tilted my head. There was no guarantee a human would accept our communication attempt, but it was worth a try. While seeing its face would make the crew shudder, there was no feasible risk. Its weapons and escape options were severed, and it was smart enough to know that. The outbound hail was sent with a swipe of my talons against the protests of the crew. A tense silence filled the air as our signal was extended to the crippled foe. There was no response for several seconds, which only added to the crew's nerves. Did these people think a predator could teleport on deck through a call? I could almost sense the Terran's bewilderment. It was weighing whether to hear our message. Curiosity must have won out, because a pair of frosty blue eyes appeared on screen. The ferocity of its gaze sent several crewmates ducking for cover. Their color looked cold and unnatural. The beast had a laceration across its forehead, and was dabbing it with a towel to keep the blood out of its vision. It's wounded. Maybe it's not thinking straight, so we can pry some intel from it. I couldn't say that looking at it didn't give me the creeps, even after decades of dealing with predators. This creature was more intelligent than anything I eliminated in the wild. There were only a few clumps of hair across its face, which made it look alien and bare. "What do you want?" "I don't need your mockery, birds," it gurgled. I resisted the urge to avert my gaze, and instead tried to make neutral observations. Beneath that petrifying visage, there were signs that the creature was rattled. The slightest furrow of its brow suggested fear, and the way its jaw tightened indicated pain. It realized its death was imminent. That knowledge overshadowed its last moments. I raised a wing in a non-committal gesture. "Nobody is mocking you. I just want to talk." "You've got to be shitting me." It leaned closer to the camera, close enough to make out the veins in its eyes. "What makes you think I want to talk to you? Enlighten me." "A hunch. I figured a pack predator wouldn't want to die alone. If I'm wrong on that, you can end this transmission now." Thyon was staring at me like I'd grown a third wing, while J-Lo was observing the exchange with amusement. I had my reasons for fielding this call in the public eye. The crew needed to see affirmation of my theories, after the skeptical reception I observed. It would be a critical lapse in understanding to presume they shared the Arxer's solitary behavioral patterns. The human bared its teeth and shook its head in disbelief. It placed its chin on its hands, then refocused those horrific eyes on the camera. Frost spiraled from its plump lips, which suggested the cabin temperature was frigid. With only a stringy flaxen mane, I didn't imagine it would last without environmental regulation for long. "You never answered my question," the beast sighed. "What is it you want?" "I want to rescue you from that icebox. Surrender yourself to our custody, peacefully, and I'll see that you survive. You can ensure that your culture is remembered." "Thanks, but no thanks. How fucking stupid do you think I am? Death is better than what you lot do to human prisoners. You have my word that I'll hold you in fair conditions. You don't want to die. I can see your fear." The predator blinked slowly and hugged its arms together to conserve warmth. It wasn't ready to give up key information now, but if I managed its needs, it might start spilling intelligence. Self-preservation was a driving force in every sapient being. The human detached a small cutout from its dashboard and turned it toward the camera. The image was of 3 snarling, young predators, with the pilot crouched beside them. Another adult primate had an arm around the offspring and was flashing pearly white fangs. They looked vicious, but happy. "That's my family. I am afraid, but not of my death," it growled. "I'm afraid that you're going to kill everyone I love. The only thing that will please you is my whole species purged from existence, and I don't know if even that will quench your hatred. Please, stop this." The transmission cut out abruptly, and I pushed down the lump of pity in my throat. There was the confirmation that humans cared for each other. I hoped that inspired a bit more sympathy for my comrades. The crocodile government shouldn't hide humanity's redeeming attributes. It was enough to establish them as a major, valid threat. The truth matters, I thought to myself. We're not going to strip that away on my ship to make ourselves feel better. The predator only has a few hours before its atmosphere is used up. "Orders, sir?" Jayla asked in an emotionless voice. I lowered my gaze. "Terminate it. A quick death, Jayla. The human refused my offer, and we can't leave it to be rescued by its brethren." The female crocodile rolled her eyes, but deployed a missile into the drive column. I watched as the wreckage went up in flame. It was merciful to grant the beast a swift end, rather than condemning it to suffocate in that freezing tomb. Still, its death didn't bring out any positive emotions. Some of the crew seemed moved by its elimination as well, which meant my strategy was a success. Thyon's nostrils flared with exasperation. "What were you thinking, Captain? What would you have done if it accepted your offer?" I would have stuck it in the brig, like I said, I answered. And no, Zarn wouldn't have gotten within 100 paces of it. We could contain a single, wounded predator, and it was useful. Useful? What did you gain from that little chat? Watch your tone, XO, this is my ship. Now, you all know the enemy as I do. You can come to terms with the real reasons for this mission. The farcical first officer gritted his teeth. Thyon was disturbed by my generous view of predators, but he knew protesting on the bridge was out of line. Perhaps he needed to believe falsehoods to maintain his conviction. All doubts needed to be sorted out before we reached Earth. Assuming the Terran ambushes were resolved, the fleet's next engagement would pummel everything humanity had into oblivion. When we reached our destination, I hoped my crew would be ready to do what was necessary.